Is my camera on? Lest we forget what's on the ballot this year. I wasn't enthused when Joe Biden became the Democratic nominee for U.S. president. That's an understatement. I stated emphatically that I could not vote for Joe Biden. Then Biden selected Kamala Harris as his running mate, but my view has not changed. I am a black female millennial, U.S. citizen and voter. My family did not immigrate to the United States. My family was brought to the United States on slave ships. We continue to suffer under racist policies and discrimination in hiring, healthcare, the U.S. courts, education, and housing. There is not a single aspect of American life that is unmarred by racism, perpetuated and condoned by the U.S. government. And this view is not my own. You can't possibly believe that the George Floyd protests are simply about the killing of one man. The protests are about the systemic, prolific, unjustified, and unredressed denial of civil and human rights to black and brown descendants of U.S. government-sanctioned slavery. This is an injury, injustice, and denial quite distinct from the desires and demands of black individuals who immigrate to the United States of their own free will to build a life better than that available to them in the lands from which they are fleeing. Black American descendants of U.S.-sanctioned slavery have always been on the front lines of the fight for the soul of this nation. We have been stripped of dignity, denied redress, and even the most basic right to plead our injuries in an unbiased forum and be justly compensated for what we have suffered. Instead, the individuals from almost every corner of the globe have settled on a consensus that black descendants of U.S. slavery are complaining without merit, that we are lazy and greedily asking for handouts for more than we deserve, and for injuries which are actually not that bad or that have occurred so long ago. This racist and ignorant consensus, eagerly agreed to by our neighbors for fear that their slice of the American pie may be reduced, culminates with the false belief that other injured non-black groups currently in America, i.e. Jews, Italians, Irish, and Hispanics, pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. Of course, this flawed ideology overlooks key facts, for example, that these other groups fled the horrific conditions and lands of their abusers, something black descendants of U.S. slavery have been unable to do, largely due to the type of deprivations that we have suffered, i.e. loss of resources and reputation. This loss of reputation deems the black community undeserving of aid at home or abroad. Holocaust survivors are compensated, and U.S. law provides protections for immigrants fleeing their abusive countries, and Native Americans receive U.S. government recognition and sovereignty, which makes Native Americans sympathetic in the view of neighbors, foreign and domestic. Our purpose here today is not to assess or to compare whether the aid received by injured groups is sufficient or just. Today, we must simply acknowledge that other non-black injured groups have received some aid and actual support to dispel the most ridiculous notion that black descendants of U.S. slavery should be required to cure injuries which we have not ourselves inflicted, and that we must cure these injuries alone. No other group in U.S. history has been made to suffer the injury, injustice, and insult the way black descendants of U.S. slavery are now being required to do. To shoulder an unjust burden, to self-heal and self-redress, unaided and alone, with an authoritative boot still on our necks, with inequity and racism still coming against us, with our neighbors standing by ambivalent and dismissive of the continued harassment, discrimination, and violence actively committed against black descendants of slavery, and by the very institution which committed the first acts. No, hashtags are not enough. No, marching is no longer enough. We as a nation have progressed. We have more resources and options at our disposal, which makes such efforts appear clearly for what they are: useless. Where does this leave us? Where does this leave America? Where does this leave black descendants of U.S. slavery? At this consequential time, the U.S. media and television personalities have lauded Kamala Harris as some sort of savior for black women and for the black community, when it is clear that the opposite is true. In fact, Kamala's selection reaffirms all of the reasons that Joe Biden is wrong for America and why Kamala is wrong for America. Poor judgment, entitled, self-serving, and self-dealing. Biden remains utterly unqualified for the office of U.S. President. Biden has never been up for the top job and has built an entire career being a backseat driver for those of qualification and character. Biden believes that because he has suffered life events, which any black descendant of U.S. slavery could tell you is just another part of the American experience, or simply put, life itself, that he should be trusted and elevated to the highest office in the land. From a Marine, a daughter of a Marine, a black woman, and a descendant of U.S. government slavery, who knows nothing but suffering in America, I have a message for Biden. Do you think that you're the only one who has suffered? If suffering, deprivation, and loss was a measure of presidential character, then we could almost always exclude white men from the top contenders list for the U.S. presidency. But that isn't the least of Biden's failures or oversights with which he approaches his quest for ascension. Did we forget Anita Hill? Did we forget that Joe Biden has been credibly accused of sexual misconduct? Closing our eyes does not clear Biden of these allegations. How could we forget how Biden responded to these allegations when raised, or how Biden responded when confronted with how he has mishandled positions of trust, authority, and leadership? No, this can't wait until after Biden has ascended. We, the people, need an answer, and we need it now. Did Biden respond like a champion or warrior defender of civil and human rights in America? Did he respond like a man who cherished and valued America and her values? No, he did not. He responded like a white man in America who has never been held accountable for his failures. Even when we insist that Donald J. Trump be held accountable for each deed, as all leaders must for a democracy to succeed, we appoint Biden as a king of America, even before the election, unaccountable to lowly female subjects who have voiced grievances and accusations against him. Yet, rather than hold Biden accountable, the Democratic Party anoints Biden as king, surrounds him by figures like Bill Clinton and Michael Bloomberg, and then puts the females on trial, or worse, dismisses their grievances and injuries as if they weren't a part of this democracy at all. What America are we living in? Who are we in 2020? As a woman, a black woman, a female descendant of U.S. slavery, I am particularly wary of those who cannot be held accountable. America is ideally at its best, a nation where no person is above the law. Yet, because of racism and corporate greed, America allowed Donald J. Trump to reign. Now, in a last-ditch effort to correct our error, America is now prepared to anoint Biden to reign, giving him sovereignty and refusing to even question his true record. I beg you to reconsider how you are prepared to save the democracy, because democracy has been built, because a democracy cannot be built from a people stripped of their ability to choose. Make no mistake, the 2016 election of Donald Trump was an appointment, and the 2020 election now seeks to appoint Joseph Biden. As a woman, a black woman, and a descendant of U.S. slavery, a survivor of sexual assault and campus assault, I must warn you, neither Joseph Biden nor Donald J. Trump are qualified to lead. Our democracy is failing. America deserves much better than Joseph Biden. And we don't get to a better America by pretending that Biden is electable just because we dislike Donald Trump. This is not the American way. Americans are not demanding a perfect presidential candidate. We're simply demanding a candidate who is presidential and aligns with the clear values that we Americans have set for ourselves, in which we are idealized for by other nations. With the nomination and acceptance of Joe Biden as the Democratic nominee for U.S. president, we fail to adhere to the highest standards that we have set for America. Only when Donald J. Trump is the alternative could Biden be a serious consideration for the office of the U.S. presidency. With his immaturity, lack of ability, and penchant for grudges, because of his clear lack of leadership and inexperience, I am sure my name is likely being added to a list of enemies and detractors to be ignored and penalized. Yet, with Joseph Biden's privileged white male American experience does not permit him to comprehend is that as a Black female descendant of U.S. government-sanctioned slavery, being ignored, penalized, and discriminated against by my own government is the only reality that I know. As a descendant of U.S. slavery, I already possess a far greater understanding of democracy than Joe Biden can ever claim to know from his castle. Joe Biden's failures and lack of leadership have led him to incorrectly assume that any black woman nominated for U.S. Vice President will save or help Black Americans. This is far from true. There is a type of Black nominee that can do more harm to Black communities than Donald J. Trump himself. And that woman is named Kamala Harris. Kamala, overwhelmingly earlier rejected for the U.S. presidency, has always helped Kamala. Her efforts and career has served to elevate and advance Kamala personally. Entitled, self-serving, and self-dealing, it isn't hard to see why Joe Biden chose Kamala. The daughter of immigrants, Kamala's public-facing U.S. career has mostly centered entirely on the personal and professional advancement of a single individual, Kamala Harris. Of course, this self-centered focus advanced by people of color almost always proves fatal to the personal and professional advancement of one of the most vulnerable and long-suffering U.S. populations still yearning to be free, Black descendants of U.S. slavery. Black descendants of U.S. slavery are not willing to sell our people for a piece of bread or the nomination or title of U.S. Vice President. However, Kamala is willing and has, in fact, already done so. There is nothing worse than being betrayed, belittled, denigrated, diminished, and sold into slavery by someone who claims to be your brother or sister, or who shares your characteristics. It is a wound which will not heal. Yet, as the offender, Kamala's duty and destiny is to beg forgiveness from those who she has injured by her selfish lust for power. This type of activism, perpetuated by people of color against people of color, sends a clear message to racists in the United States and around the world. Racists can achieve their goals and appear politically correct or hide racism in plain sight by tolerating, hiring, and advancing only those Black and brown people who also cause harm to Black and brown people. It isn't only Kamala's commissions, but her omissions, which make her so dangerous to my community. This is the clear danger of Kamala Harris. Rather than stand with, fight for, defend, protect, advance, and promote goals, ideas, and values that benefit a community, Kamala has always, from start to finish, shed anything and anyone that gets in the way of Kamala first. This is not a woman of color I would support for the U.S. presidency, for U.S. vice president, for the Senate, or for a nursery. In fact, Kamala's appointment can only be monumental in a society where racism is flourishing. She has already proved herself to be more of a danger to Black America than Donald J. Trump himself. With Kamala, you don't see the discrimination until it's too late. I am Theresa Giovanna, and these are my honest and humble opinions and experiences, and this is what gives me hopes today. America at its best is a land not of kingmakers and autocrats, but of many diverse people, nations, and ideologies. I have faith that in spite of past and present failures, Black American descendants of U.S. slavery will rise in spite of mass efforts to thwart redress. We are not a land of kings, so this ascension will not be due to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris or Donald Trump and Mike Pence, but because Black Americans are resilient voters, faith-filled warriors, and advocates for social justice and change. As a Black woman, I have watched every modern social justice initiative launched during my lifetime fail to protect and defend Black people from the violence and discrimination that has long impoverished the Black community, even while according relief to similarly situated non-Black humans, and even when the very mission of the organization is to aid Black Americans. This impacts me in multiple ways, but not a single one of those ways motivates me to hate or discriminate in response to even this great injustice. I recognize the disproportionate uphill battle faced by descendants of U.S. slavery, and I am committed to fight for redress. I am no Kamala Harris. I am Theresa Giovanna. I will stand with my community at its lowest points. I cannot leave my security, well-being, and future in the hands of another. This election day, I, Theresa Giovanna, will cast my vote. My vote will not be for a candidate or political system. Frankly, I see no good choices here. Instead, I will cast my vote for democracy, justice, and redress.